I used to believe cruelty always announced itself with raised voices or shattered glass. Mine arrived as laughter behind a nearly closed door on a birthday morning that smelled of jasmine and coffee. I stood there with a certificate for $100,000 in my hand, a gift in my husband's name to a children's foundation, and heard him call me a fat cow. His mother told him to pretend until he inherited everything, then discard me like an old piñata stuffed with regrets. People say the first betrayal is a knife. They forget that the second is the hand that steadies the blade. My name is Savannah Rodas. I was born into old money and taught to move like a swan across polished floors, to dress in soft silks, to offer donations with a soft smile that hid the sting of being measured against a body that never pleased the watchers. At 42, I had warm brown eyes and a figure that made social pages whisper and smile with teeth. I married Marcus Sterling, a charming man, 7 years younger, whose gaze could sell sunshine to a window. In public, he was a rising politician. In private, he was a ledger of calculations. 10 years of marriage left us with no children, no scandal, and no love. I told myself dignity could be a home. I was wrong. Dignity without truth is only a waiting room. That morning in the Greenwich Mansion, the hour on the hallway clock read 10:16 a.m. I had just come down the grand staircase with my envelope and I heard his voice in the parlor, bright with mockery, telling his mother that he only cared about my money and that sleeping beside me disgusted him. Her reply did not tremble. Pretend until you have it all. Do what you must afterward. They laughed with the lightness of people who have never had to ask for mercy. My body wanted to fold, but my face did not move. I let the envelope slide to the carpet without a sound, walked back upstairs, and closed my bedroom door. I did not cry. I did not confront. Some truths do not need witnesses. They need decisions. I showered, dressed for his dinner, and smiled at the table. I gave him the Rolex he craved and poured wine while his mother suggested I try a friend's diet. The joke rose like steam. I swallowed it with the Cabernet. After midnight, he slept in the main suite, and I walked the halls barefoot, touching the frames of paintings I had chosen, the Italian furniture I had shipped, the grand piano I never learned to play. The house felt like a museum built for a woman I could no longer impersonate. In the study, I wrote a single line on crisp paper. Thanks for showing your true colors. I signed nothing. I opened my laptop and did what managing a family fortune had taught me. In less than an hour, I moved assets I had once guarded, contacted a discreet broker and a foreign buyer, and arranged the sale of the mansion to close at a speed that would look like thunder on paper. By 5 a.m., I locked the front door for the last time. No one saw me leave. I carried a backpack, a dark coat, my passport, some cash, and a faded photograph of myself at 18, arms open to the sea, before the sterling name turned me into an ornament. He woke to silence, found the note on the pillow, and mistook resolve for a tantrum. By afternoon, he learned the house had sold and that he had no claim to suit still in the closet. Somewhere a bank clerk leaked a whisper to a finance reporter. Somewhere a fuse began to burn. I rode a city bus into the South Shore neighborhood of Chicago, where no one would know my face or my past. The last stop announcement scratched through an old speaker. I stepped onto cracked pavement that remembered winters and promises that never arrived. Children chased one another around puddles. A man sold ribs from a truck while an old radio played a voice that sounded like a prayer. I found a tape notice that read room for rent, shared bath, no questions asked. The door opened to a woman with wary eyes. Name, she said. I became Maya Solar by moving my tongue in a new way. The room was small. A humming fan trembled on the ceiling. The window did not close all the way. To me, it felt like sanctuary. I paid for a month, slept on a hard mattress, and woke with a plan that had nothing to do with revenge. I walked to a community clinic with peeling paint and a front desk made of stacked boxes. A man with tired eyes and rolled sleeves was talking to a mother about medicine she could not afford. I offered to help with inventory and donations. He looked at my hands, noticed my careful speech, and did not ask for a pass. "I am Elijah Vance," he said. "Welcome, Maya. We need more hands than questions." Days taught me how to fold stained sheets and count gauze. I learned the names of women who cleaned other homes and went home to hungry children. I listened more than I spoke. No cameras, no lace, no applause. In those rooms, I met Lena, a thin 8-year-old whose eyes held too much winter. Elijah examined her and went quiet in the hall. He suspected leukemia, and we would need labs that cost more than anyone could confess. I watched the girl whisper secrets to a doll missing an arm and felt an old world fall away. I had once given money to gild a politician's image. Now my palms itched to give in a way that might save one child. I was done being an object. It was time to become a person. The morning after Elijah said the word we both feared, I stood in the clinic supply closet and counted gauze as if the rhythm could keep panic at bay. At 9:10 a.m., Lena arrived, pale and brave, her small hand tethered to her grandmother's sleeve. She smiled at me as if I were sunlight and laid her doll on the exam table for courage. Elijah listened to her lungs, ordered more tests, and came back with the look of a man trying to carry a mountain without letting anyone see him bend. "We need labs," he said softly. "We need them now." Money was a wall between a child and a chance to live. I had spent years mortaring walls with generosity that photographed well. I was done with walls. That night, I emptied my backpack onto the bed. Documents, cash, passport, a notebook with sentences I wrote when my chest felt heavy enough to crack. At the very bottom lay my grandmother's sapphire ring, the only jewel I had kept as a kind of stubborn heartbeat. By 7:40 p.m., I walked into a quiet shop where the lights hummed and the proprietor examined things with a jeweler's melancholy. He named a number that hurt because it was honest. I nodded. By 8:25 p.m., I left with a bank draft that would open the door to the labs and the first round of treatment. I returned to the clinic and set the envelope in Elijah's hand. "Do not ask me for a receipt," I said. "Ask me for more chairs in the waiting room when this is over." He met my eyes, not with suspicion, but with a kind of terrified gratitude that made us both step back from tears. South Shore feels like a place that teaches you to carry joy and grief in the same basket. By 2 p.m. the next day, we organized a small fair behind the clinic. Women baked sweet bread and braided ribbons into little bracelets. Men grilled ribs until the air tasted like hope. Children ran with chalked hands and left messages on the cracked pavement. I convinced a grocer across town to donate boxes of fruit that would have spoiled by morning. Elijah moved through the crowd like a careful breeze, straightening a table here, reassuring a father there. I watched Lena hand out bracelets from a folding chair and felt my heart settle into a new rhythm that did not ask permission. Miss Dela, who carried a certain weather in her eyes, pressed a cup of coffee into my hands around 4:30 p.m. "You are not running from fraud," she said, without judgment. "You are running from a life that kept you polished and starving. Choose who gets to look at you now. Some eyes only want a body. Others want a soul. Elijah's are the second kind." I swallowed the coffee, and a truth I had not found the words to name. I had come to disappear and was instead being seen. The call came 3 days later while I was filing intake cards. Elijah answered on the second ring, and I watched his shoulders tighten at the name that crackled through the cheap speaker. Sterling. The syllables hit me like a door slamming in a storm. I dropped a stack of forms. He looked up, and the understanding passed between us without language. After the call, he stepped outside and lit a cigarette like a man repeating an old mistake just to feel the old ache. I stood in the doorway and asked what it was. "A patient file," he said, "from years ago. The name is a stain that does not wash out." He did not know that name had been my cage and my address. I slept little after that. At 5:15 a.m., I sat on the edge of the bed with the window cracked and the fan clicking above me, writing down a sentence I wanted to believe. Fear is a cage with open doors. It felt brave in the notebook and fragile in my chest. I walked to the warehouse I had quietly purchased through a clean name. Pigeons started from the rafters when I opened the metal door. Dust rose in slow light and made the empty space look holy. I drew a map in my mind. A kitchen here, cots there. A room for legal counsel, a room for quiet. A place where women could arrive without having to trade their names for safety. I wrote vendors, permits, budgets in the margins, and did not let myself look back. The closer I moved toward purpose, the nearer the past came sniffing. A black SUV idled outside the clinic one afternoon at 1:55 p.m., its windows tinted dark enough to turn faces into rumors. I was returning with gauze in a brown paper bag when I saw the shape of the driver through the glass. I did not run. I turned into an alley and walked the length of a fence that smelled of rust and sun-baked secrets, breathing through my nose as if each step were an argument with panic. The vehicle idled for a long time and then rolled away. I stood still until the sound faded. He was close. Too close. But not close enough to smother who I had become. Lena's collapse a week later erased every other thought. She swayed while handing a bracelet to a boy and crumpled like paper, a thin line of blood bright at her nostril. We lifted her to the exam room. Elijah's voice shifted into one that could command chaos. Oxygen, labs, a call to a contact who owed him a favor. I stayed at her bedside, palm on her hair, whispering promises I did not yet know how to keep. I had not been a mother, and yet my body remembered how to pray like one. By 7:10 p.m., Elijah told me the quiet thing. "It is leukemia. We are at the threshold. The treatment will be long and brutal. The envelope from the ring would be enough to start. It would not be enough to finish." I sat with her grandmother under the humming fluorescent light at 9 p.m. and learned silence can be a lullaby. When the old woman finally slept with her chin on her chest, I stepped into the corridor. Elijah leaned against the wall, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes carrying a tempest. "You did not come here to hide," he said. "You came here to rebuild." His voice was steady, but something else lived beneath it, an intuition tracing the outline of my face to photographs he could not unsee. I thought of my name like a sparrow cupped in my palms and wondered how much longer I could keep it from flying. Elijah began watching me the way a careful man watches a storm cloud, calmly, but with a readiness that says he knows it will eventually break. I could feel his questions pressing behind every small kindness. When he finally asked, "Did you ever live abroad?" I lied with practiced ease. I told him I had studied in Europe, worked in Washington, D.C., and that the accent people sometimes heard was just the ghost of education. You nodded, but the silence that followed had edges. By then I knew it was only a matter of time before my past would find me, whether through a photograph, a rumor, or his eyes. One night I returned to the warehouse after closing the clinic. I sat on a crate surrounded by blueprints and notes, the half-light from a street lamp falling through the cracks. I wrote one sentence in my notebook, "Fear is a cage with open doors," and closed it before my hands could shake. That was when Miss Della appeared with a loaf of bread wrapped in paper. "You're not running from fraud," she said, her voice steady. "You're running from fear. Who are you afraid of?" I wanted to answer Marcus, but the truth was heavier. "Myself," I whispered. She nodded, touched my shoulder, and left. At 3 p.m. the next day, The world tilted. A volunteer posted photos from the fair online, a simple gallery of smiling faces and hand-painted stalls. In one corner of a frame, half blurred, was me. That single image reached a news feed in Manhattan. By nightfall, Marcus Sterling's rage was echoing off glass walls and marble floors. "Find her," he told his investigator. "I don't care how." 3 days later, his black SUV rolled through South Shore like a shark through shallow water. I saw it as I came out of a pharmacy with bandages in a paper bag. The shape of him inside was unmistakable, even through tinted glass. My heart stuttered, then learned a new rhythm: quiet survival. I turned, walked quickly down an alley, slipped between 2 buildings, and waited until the hum of the engine was swallowed by distance. I didn't breathe until I reached the warehouse. He hadn't seen me, but he was close enough to smell the life I was building. Sleep abandoned me for nights. The fan in my room buzzed like an anxious insect, and every car outside made my muscles tense. Only Lena's bracelet, a loop of red threads she'd given me, kept me anchored. "So you won't leave," she'd said. She was my compass now, fragile and radiant. But even love can't quiet a conscience forever. Elijah, restless with doubts of his own, came early one morning, his face pale from a night without rest. "We need to talk," he said. I followed him to the warehouse, where dawn's light filtered through the cracks like truth finding a way in. "Who are you really, Maya?" he asked, his voice low. I wanted to deny it, but lies grow heavy when carried too long. "Savannah Rodas," I said finally. The air between us changed shape. He whispered my name as if it were both a wound and a prayer. "I wasn't hiding to deceive you," I said. "I left because I couldn't survive one more day being a trophy for a man who despised me. I just wanted a life that didn't hurt." He listened without interrupting, his hands trembling slightly. "You weren't a coward," he said at last. "You were brave enough to leave. But now you have to be brave enough to come back, to face them, to reclaim your name before they twist it again." His words landed like both threat and promise. Days later, the world shifted again. News broke from Washington. Documents leaked, linking Marcus and his mother Evelyn to money laundering and bribery. Their empire of charm cracked under headlines and hashtags. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt pity, the kind reserved for people who can't tell the difference between ambition and disease. Then came another twist. Evelyn herself asked to meet Elijah. He found her in a hotel outside the city, aged decades in a week. "Marcus isn't my son," she confessed, her voice almost a whisper. "He was conceived through violence when I was 18. I hid it, raised him as my own, but now he's become that man and I can't bear it." She handed Elijah a box of documents and photographs. Among them, a file hinted that Lena's deceased mother might be connected by blood to the same man, the predator behind Evelyn's secret. Fate had been stitching the same wound through generations. When Elijah told me, I felt the air vanish. I walked to the window, needing space to hold everything. The corruption, the coincidence, the small, fragile lives depending on what we would do next. "I have something to tell you too," I said, my voice thin. "I'm sick. ALS. I was diagnosed before I left. That's why I couldn't stay. I didn't want to die surrounded by vultures waiting for the reading of a will." He stepped forward and took my hand with a steadiness that made the room stop spinning. "Then we'll make what's left count," he said. "We'll finish the foundation. We'll leave something that outlives us both." And in that promise, something inside me softened. I had been running from fear. Now, for the first time, I was walking toward purpose. The following weeks moved like quiet miracles stitched together by calloused hands and shared exhaustion. The warehouse transformed into something alive. The women of South Shore painted the walls white and then covered them with bright murals of birds, stars, and open doors. Men who'd spent years hauling bricks now mixed cement for free, saying they were building for their daughters. Elijah coordinated supplies and medical permits, and I, Savannah again, though still signing papers as Maya Solar, transferred every last trace of my wealth to the new foundation. The Maya Solar Foundation, named after the woman I'd pretended to be, but who had somehow become the truest version of me. Lena's treatment continued at the small clinic. Her hair thinned, her cheeks hollowed, but her eyes stayed fierce. Every day she would hold my hand and whisper a new dream, sometimes about growing up to be a nurse, other times about owning a house full of stray cats. I smiled and nodded, even as my own muscles began to stiffen, even as every movement reminded me that time was now a currency I was spending faster than I could count. By the time the foundation officially opened its doors, I could barely climb the steps without Elijah's steady arm. There were no cameras, no speeches, no champagne. Just neighbors, patients, children, and the scent of bread baking in the communal kitchen. Lena, wearing a small white hat, carried the scissors to cut the ribbon. When she snipped the red thread, the crowd erupted into applause. I felt my throat tighten. Every sound in that moment felt holy. Evelyn appeared quietly near the end of the ceremony, unannounced and unadorned. She looked smaller, her eyes swollen with sleepless guilt. When she found me, I didn't flinch. She said she wasn't there to justify herself, only to apologize, not for Marcus, but for her own silence. I hated you, she confessed, because you reflected everything I wished I'd had the courage to be. I listened, then said, I forgive you for what you did to yourself, not for what you did to me. The words felt like release, not victory. She wept, her tears landing on the floor between us like a quiet surrender. Marcus came days later, hollow-eyed and desperate. His campaign was dead, his accounts frozen, his name dragged across every screen in America. He stood in the foundation courtyard with a briefcase in hand, asking for a deal. I looked down from the second floor, feeling only pity. When I met him outside, he tried to sound calm. I can destroy you, he said. Say you faked your disappearance, that you stole everything. I smiled faintly. I already did steal everything. The only thing you never valued. Dignity. I handed him an envelope. Inside was a letter I had written weeks earlier, before knowing if I would live to deliver it. It read, Power without love is hollow. Money without soul is death. You killed me when I was alive, but I resurrected, and you are still buried in your ego. We are no longer enemies. We are nothing. He left without another word. I watched him walk away, and for the first time, I felt no weight in my chest. That night, Elijah and I lay side by side in the small room at the foundation, listening to the distant hum of the city. Are you afraid? He asked quietly. I have peace, I said, which isn't the absence of fear, but it's enough. He whispered that he loved me, and I took his hand, pressing it to my chest. It was both an answer and a goodbye. At sunrise, he returned with coffee. I was still in bed, smiling faintly, eyes closed. When he touched my hand, the warmth had gone. He didn't cry right away. He just sat beside me until the sun filled the room. On the table were envelopes addressed to Elijah, Lena, Miss Della, and Evelyn. Elijah's note said, Don't mourn what wasn't, cherish what was. You gave me light when I thought all I had left was duty. Carry this work forward, not for me, but for every woman who thinks she must disappear to be reborn. Lena's note read, Promise me you'll write your story, because the world needs to know a little girl who defeated fear. Her ashes were scattered in the foundation garden. beneath a young almond tree that Lena promised to water every morning. No marble grave, no politicians, no cameras, just earth, roots, and peace. The Maya Solar Foundation continued to grow. Women came from different cities, escaping violence, poverty, and silence. Each one carried her own story, and in the white corridors, those stories intertwined like threads in a tapestry of survival. Elijah published her manuscript months later, a journal she'd written secretly during her final year. Its title? My Husband Said I Disgusted Him. The book went viral, shared quietly among women who read it with tears and trembling. Universities studied it, book clubs whispered about it, and every copy carried a line in the dedication: for the invisible women who are ready to awaken. Lena grew stronger. She became a writer, publishing a children's book inspired by Savannah, about a girl who used a red bracelet to chase away monsters of gray days. She named the second foundation branch the House of the Reborn. On one of its walls, she painted a quote from Savannah's letter. Words heal, too. Evelyn donated her remaining fortune and vanished from public life. Some said she joined a convent. Others believe she spent her final years volunteering in shelters. Marcus faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered in political circles. Elijah never remarried. He stayed at the foundation, wearing a locket around his neck that held a strand of Savannah's hair and a note. When you doubt yourself, touch this. Here is the part of me that will never leave. A year later, at the first memorial for Savannah, women filled the courtyard. One of them took the microphone and said, I was invisible until I read her story. Savannah didn't die. She woke up in me. Elijah closed his eyes and smiled, knowing that in every woman who found her strength, Savannah was still alive. If this story touched you, share it so others can feel what courage sounds like when whispered by a woman who refused to stay silent. Like, comment, and subscribe to keep her voice alive.